Hello, everyone. My name is Megan McGeehan. I'm a CSPC Programs Committee volunteer. We are about to start the panel entitled Science Advice Abroad, Global Perspectives from INSGA and Future Directions. And it's organized by les Fonds de Recherche du Québec. Cette année, la CSPC offre la traduction simultanée et les sous-titres pour tous les panels en français et en anglais. Vous pouvez scanner le QR code sur la table pour télécharger l'application et accéder aux sous-titres dans la langue de votre choix. Veuillez utiliser votre propre appareil et casque. We do have the conference mobile app. Please feel free to download the CSPC 2025 app, available in the App Store or Google Play. Please remember to tweet about your favorite events and panels at the conference using @SciencePolicy and the hashtag CSPC 2025. And finally, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation survey for each of the sessions this morning in the program app. Your feedback helps us improve this conference for next year. So without further ado, enjoy the panel and thank you for being here. I will now hand over the conversation to none other than Rémi Quirion.
Oui, bon matin à tous. Merci d'être avec nous ce matin pour discuter de conseils scientifiques et en particulier de conseils scientifiques à l'international. So today we'll give you an overview of INSGA, the International Network for Governmental Science Advice. I'll start by asking you to raise your hand, those of you who are members of INSGA. So it seems it's all on that side. So there's work to do on this side. Before I talk a bit more about INSGA, the panel member, so from Mauritius, the first speaker in charge of the chapter, the African chapter, Shaheen Motala Timol, online. And then the second speaker, Marcus Proch, is at the European Parliament, and he's representing the younger generation, although maybe with the job he has, he's aging rapidly. Then after that, Marie-Christine Terrier at one of the universities in Quebec, ENAP, and she's in charge of the North American chapter. And finally, Soledad Cuzos from Chile, and she's one of the VP, the vice president of INSGA. So they told us that this panel is the most international panel of the conference. So we're very proud of that. Now it's on their shoulder to make sure that they will deliver properly. So as I said, INSGA, the objective of INSGA is building capacity science advice globally. One of the unique features of INSGA, now a bit over 10 years old, that it was established first in the Global South. So the very first workshop on capacity building in science advice was held in South Africa, building the chapter, South African chapter, and then, not South African, the African chapter, then Latin America, Asia, more recently Europe, and now working on a chapter in North America. So now we have a network of chapters, and one of the key features of INSGA, organizing a workshop, so that are basically initiated locally. What's the challenge, let's say, in South Africa in terms of science advice? And we base the exercise, the workshop, on questions raised by participants originating from that region of the world. And we support them to basically have a successful workshop. And usually it works very well. And they are all role-playing. For those of you who like to play game, that's the type of thing we do at INSGA. And at the end of let's say, a day and a half of a workshop, the winner will be either the president of that part of the world or the opposition leader. So that's usually the way it works. But what's key for us is to make sure that we can nurture these interactions, these collaboration, yes, on one continent, but more and more in the network. I will not go in detail in terms of the type of project that we have been supporting over the past few years. A lot of information is on the website. Here this week, we had a meeting of the board of INSGA in Canada for the first time, meeting in person for most of the board members. Many of them are in the front row here, and I would like to maybe just mention two persons. Christiane Allen, that many of you maybe have met. She was involved with INSGA in the very, very early days. One of the, I'd say, the key person in the organization. We're proud of her. She's Canadian, although now she's living in New Zealand. Nothing is perfect. And then Grant Mills there. Also, if you need information, you want to know more about website, about information about building capacity in various chapters all over the world, Grant knows a lot about that, and he's based Australia or New Zealand, depending on the weather, probably. You know, he's moving from what to do now. So we're very pleased to have you with us today. Hopefully, we'll have enough time for questions from all of you, and then 10:15 is there will be a meet and greet session in the Alberta room, not too far from here. So if you want to discuss more with the board member about INSGA, I will be very pleased to welcome you there. So now each panelist will be able to have about 5 minutes to talk about science advice in their part of the world. And really the question is, considering the current geopolitical situation, the challenge in the world today, in my words, what works well in terms of science advice, what does not work so well in terms of science advice in your part of the world? And we'll start online with Shane.
So thank you, Remy. I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Shaheen Mutalatimo from Mauritius, and I'm the chair of the chapter under the Higher Education Commission in Mauritius. Now I'm based in the university in Mauritius. So I have to say that what I am excited about in Africa is that we are witnessing a growing recognition of the value of evidence-informed policy. So science advice is now talked about more than it was like 10 years ago. So this is exciting because it shows that there's a shift from the ad hoc decision-making to more structured, inclusive approach that we use here on the continent. And we've seen like there's a growing number of science academies across Africa. We have a lot of structures that are in place that support science advice and help to bridge the gap between science and policy interface. So even in North Africa, we have very long established academies, and they have proven experience in policy engagement. And something that is really also very interesting in Africa is that we have a very young population of scientists who are interested in engaging in science advice. So we've seen many governmental and also independent institutions like INSGA Africa under the banner of Global INSGA that are playing key roles in this transformation through different types of initiative. For instance, mentoring initiatives, webinar that we do so that we are inclusive, we can access a lot of people. But I think that, as you mentioned, we live in a time where, because of these tensions that we have, these climate emergencies, and a lot of social inequalities too. So all these are converging in ways that challenge the very foundation of how we see the evolution of science policy interface. So in Africa, I would say that these kind of pressures are also impacted by historical legacies and the structural dependencies that still continue to shape how policy is made and whose voices are heard. So this is my concern today. And as one of my friends mentioned recently, although we are 12% of the world population, yet less than 1% of the global research output is produced from Africa. It's not that research is not done, it's that research output is not there. So the question that arises is that what research and what evidence do we use for the multiple complex challenges that we need to address in Africa? Should we be using research that is conducted elsewhere and most of the time in the global north? So this is some of the concern that I have. But I think that there is a lot of option for us, as we say in science advice. So this is what we need to explore today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shaheen. Short, brief introduction. And if you have questions for Shaheen or the other panelists, of course, after the brief presentation, then we'll open up for exchange and question. Thank you very much, Shaheen. Marcus.
Yeah, hello. Is it working? Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much also for having me. I should say that when I was asked to give an account of the situation in Europe, it's not an easy task as with any region, because the question is, of course, about what Europe are we talking? Europe in a geographical sense, more specifically Europe, north or south, east or west. So in that sense, problems are specific, challenges are specific. At the same time, however, there are also obviously common challenges that we are facing, but maybe also common elements that give some hope. And I start with the positive elements. I think what we can say in Europe is that the sophisticated systems of science advice that are existing, and I would say with a little bit of pride as well, maybe Europe has the most established formalized systems of science advice in the world, both at national levels but also supranational levels, are consolidating. They are working, they are functioning. Or to put it maybe in more philosophical terms, I think the spirit of the Enlightenment in the Kantian sense, that rationality, reason should play a role also in policy making, is still intact, largely. Having said that, however, we are facing, I think what I see also a bit of a, not just challenges, but also a trend. And I would say it's a reduced ability, but also especially willingness to take up also the evidence that is generated through science, through the established mechanisms. Ingeborg Bachmann, an Austrian author, once said with regard to history, history teaches us something constantly, but it finds few students. Today, I would say, with regard to science policy interface, science teaches us something constantly, but it finds few students among the policymakers. The reasons for that are manifold, and I think here it's global in the sense lack of trust in academic institutions, maybe also a lack of communication skills between science and politics, but also maybe more fundamentally a re-ideologization of politics. I mean, of course, politics is always ideological, but in the sense that today you would just discard any evidence as saying, what I do is right because I think it's right. And I think this is really a trend that you can also witness in Europe, even to different degrees. Another element of more fundamental concern is that academic freedom is coming under pressure in Europe as well. So far, only in a few member states of the European Union and outside the European Union, but still, I mean, the fact that for the first time since the Second World War, a university had to leave a country in Europe is an alarming signal. Also, that academic freedom is coming under pressure in more subtle ways, in the sense of that funding is taken away if you are doing research in certain areas is a concern. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed. And I think this is also a forum here where we can and should address these issues. So in summary, I would say the glass is neither half full nor half empty. It's a mixed result for Europe, but there are alarming trends, and I think this in itself worries me since we are starting from a fairly robust level and we are rather risking going down. I would stop here and hand over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Merci, merci Marcus. Thank you very much. Marie-Christine, your takes, North America.
Thank you, Rémi. So, I'm Marie-Christine Terrien. I'm a professor of public management at the National School of Public Administration. I built a living lab on urban resilience governance. But for the last 20 years, I've been working with cities, and I work with them really in a very pragmatic way. We have a team that works very closely with the cities in what they need and how they want to achieve that. So I'm wondering, in the room, how many of you are on a municipal level or from a municipality?
New collaborator.
New collaborators, absolutely. That's the positive way to see it, but I'm also seeing very few hands. And I think there's a real need to look at science advice on a municipal or on a city level. So working with these cities on different issues, whether it be climate resilience, crisis management, the introduction of artificial intelligence, we've learned a few things which were hopeful, that this will help build the chapter, because Remy didn't mention it, but I'm the newbie around here, and I'm very grateful to be part of this new INSGA group. So my take on the North American situation, even though we're working from the very city level, there are some trends that we can look at. And these are good for North America, but they're also good for a lot of other cities, whether in Europe, and we've worked with cities in Africa and Asia also. But more specifically, the North American science advice ecosystem, I can say, is quite institutionally strong, especially at the federal levels, whether it's Mexico, US, or Canada. It's obviously scientifically very prolific, but it's really highly fragmented across the federal, state, or provincial systems and the municipal levels. Things don't easily trickle down from one silo to the next. So what we see is really a rapid rise of local science capabilities in cities. They are looking for this capacity to build a link with science. But the elements that are particular to cities is that, as you can probably imagine, they live in a very, very pragmatic world. It's really important for cities that the citizens have the basic services. So when we come in to talk about science, we've learned that we don't have to push it down their throat. That's not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is evidences or methodologies that can help them help their citizens. And that, I think that's a really important factor that I can come back a little later on maybe. There's also an increasing demand, not for knowledge production, and I'm not saying that we have to stop producing science. I think it's very important. But and it was said on the previous panel, the importance of knowledge translation for cities is really important. How they can use it right away, how it can help them be better administrators, have more capacity, maybe even economic capacity built through science. The third thing that we've noticed is that there's a growing reliance on what we like to call boundary organizations. So this is what we've tried to build at the lab, and this is what we're going to be building through INSGA North America. Living labs, civic innovation labs, resilience centers, climate centers, etc. This interface that we can build between universities and cities, there needs to be a space, even sometimes a physical space, where exchanges can be made sort of on a neutral yeah, on a neutral basis. And maybe the fourth element that we've obviously seen, and I'm sure you've seen it all, is that we're in a context where crises have become permanent. It's not, oh, when are we expecting the next one? It's just constantly there. And cities are at the forefront of this. So whether it's flood, infrastructure failure, pandemics, housing crises, cyber threats, securities, etc., they are always on the forefront. And I won't be getting into this, but in terms of budgetary capacity compared to other levels of government, they are on a stronghold. So municipal governments, they sit at the forefront or at the front lines of these global challenges. So they're very local, but they're hit by global challenges, and they're trying to look at how they can do this. So building a network of cities that can exchange with the university centers is going to be at the forefront of what we're going to be doing at INSGA North America. So it's a strategic niche that we think will be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marie-Christine. And often when we talk about science advice at the level of cities, and we discuss with mayor or elected officials of the cities, I often say it's not time for us as advisors to write a PhD thesis. It has to be action, it has to be very, very focused and actionable very, very quickly. When you have a flood, you have to do something very, very quickly for your citizen. Soledad.
Thank you. Hello? Okay. My name is Soledad Quiroz. I'm VP of Policy of INSGA, and today I'm representing the Latin American region. Because like our region, we are going through change in the chair of the committee, of the chapter. Latin America is a very diverse region in many senses, in biodiversity, culturally, politically, and in languages. So it is very hard for us to act and feel like a whole region. In international negotiations like IPCC, COPs, we don't act as a unit. And that happens also in other international fronts. So for us, it's really hard to convene and have something like an European Union or countries like Canada and US, which are very large, that can organize a lot of people in an easier way. The context is also very different in terms of economical resources for science specifically. The OECD spends approximately 2.4% of GDP in science and technology. I was looking up, Canada invests 1.8% of GDP in science and technology. Latin America, less than 0.5%. And that is not this year. That has been like that for at least 15 years. So if you think you don't have enough resources, well, we don't have either. Interestingly, every time I get the chance to talk to people from other countries or regions, the concerns seem to be the same. Without, it's never enough. There's never enough resources. There's never enough people working in science and technology. So that is something that I think gives me hope and gives me the drive to keep talking to other people in our other regions because I know we can collaborate on the same issues. Also, the context is different in terms of number of scientists. Again, I look it up. You in Canada have 15.2 scientists per 1,000 workers. We in Chile only reach 1 scientist per 1,000 worker. And I was trying to get the numbers for Mexico and Colombia. There's no data. That's another problem we have. We don't have enough data to compare and to follow on policies for science, technology, and innovation. We need to gather more data. So that gives us 2 problems. We have few scientists with fewer resources, and they are trying to do their jobs in the laboratory, in the university. They have less time to go out and interact with politicians, interact with communities, interact with society in general. And I think we share that part with other countries, is not considered in the evaluation of academics that you take time to go and talk to policymakers, you take time to go and talk to communities, which is needed, is very much needed. But if you don't consider that when you are thinking in evaluation of the academics, it could backfire. One exciting thing is happening is that scientists are becoming more and more aware that this communication with society is really needed. They really want to participate, so they are coming out and they are asking for training to participate in congressional hearings and going to municipalities, going to talk to their representatives, and participating in political groups. So we are participating more, we are asking more. We are also, there's a lot of interest in science diplomacy in Latin America. I think because naturally scientists go to conferences all around the world and connect with other scientists and see the potential there. So I think the trends are looking good because we are connecting more and we can leverage more knowledge for our shared needs, but also learn more from what is happening around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soledad. Before I ask a few questions, I'd like just to ask you, the panelists, any comment that you would like to make considering what the other member of the panel have said? Shaheen or Soledad, Marie-Christine, Marcus, do you want to add something to some of the comments that the others made?
Well, maybe just a quick word that I'm thinking that we're using the word, so it's not a comment directly on what they're saying, it's just, I think, a comment on a word that we're using, and I wonder if it's the right word. I wonder if we should call it science advice. I'm wondering if we should think of another word, maybe of something like science support or science exchange, or nothing really exciting comes to mind. So maybe you have ideas, but this way that we have of not always, but sometimes portraying ourselves as, hi, I'm coming in to give you advice. Well, maybe it's unsolicited and they don't really care for your advice, and who are you? And so we did a study on that, especially at the municipal level. So we talked to researchers and we talked to the city officers, and we said, well, okay, you guys worked with teams of scientists, whether it's in the hard sciences or in the social sciences, and so what do you think? And a lot of things come to mind, but the first thing that they said is, well, they come in and criticize us because they say that the way of doing things is not right. Well, that's not a good way of selling your advice. And then we talk to the researchers and we ask them, so, when you work with the cities, how does that feel? And they're like, well, they're not fitting my program into their policy. Okay, so did you check the policy before? No, I don't know how to do that. So there's a big gap, and I'm wondering if advice is the right word.
Good way to start a discussion. Mark.
Yeah, no, just to follow up and second what Marie-Christine said, I think this doesn't just apply for the municipal level, but also at other levels of policy making, especially when advice is misunderstood as I'm teaching you what you're doing wrong currently, because I know, just coming out of my ivory tower, how you should do your job. This is really a non-starter. And I'm afraid it could be consciously or subconsciously, but this is often how science advice is perceived. People are coming that have at least, and this is maybe what Soledad said, at least in the Western world, usually relatively safe working environments. You tell policymakers who are up for election in a couple of years, you should do this and that. Because if me as a scientist, I'm wrong, I say it was a wrong hypothesis. If you are wrong, you're not getting re-elected. And I think this is, of course, an attitude we have to reflect upon. So in other words, also to have this mutual understanding. It doesn't mean that, policymakers are always right. And, often they are also very instrumental about the use and they may just discard input because they don't like it. At the same time, I think we should also be humble as scientists just to see as well what are the limitations, the shortcomings, the frameworks within which policymakers operate.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think this highlights the need for training. It doesn't have to be a 5-year training, but we need training to talk to each other. And that's what INSGA does so well and has worked so well, at least in Latin America. It's been a highlight because to understand the really different context we are exposed to and we are used to is not easy. And that training really, really helps to connect better with the other person.
Thank you. Shane, do you want to add anything here?
Yes, I wanted to say that what Soledad mentioned resonates a lot with what we face also in Africa, because many people, they talk about Africa, but it's not a monolith. There are so many different countries, different languages, but the want and the interest in science advice that we've seen at the level of researchers is really growing. And this is what we at INSGA Africa, and we want to address. Sorry, my phone. I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is what we want to address in the work that we do. And we've seen on the ground that there is also a need to talk more with the citizens, to involve them in the process, like citizens' advice to decision makers. And this is a gap that has to be maybe discuss more, maybe research more. So there are research that we need to do for us to do science advice better. And this is not easy because in Africa, the distances, the places that we have to be are very different, and we don't have access to people. We still have this gap in access to technology, to internet. In many places, we face that with researchers on the ground. So I think that there are so many issues that we want to look into, but as Soledad mentioned, resources are very low in terms of human capacity, in terms of funding. So, but I'm hopeful because there is this appetite for people to engage, because hope is always there. I think this is the thing that pulls us out when we are in facing challenges, wherever we are. And this is common across, I would say, continent.
Well, thank you very much for all four of you. So maybe here we have a bit of if you want to play a bit of a game, as I mentioned, so if you want to suggest some different name for advice. I don't know legally if we'll go there. That's another story. But maybe you have some suggestion there. Just myself in Quebec as an advisor, peace science advisor to the Quebec government. Now, when I talk with elected officials, more and more is suggestion to be a bit on the softer side. Because I remember one that was made some recommendation to a minister, and he did not follow it. And I was a bit upset. I was just at the beginning of my tenure. And then he said, well, Remy, if you want to make decision, run for office, become a minister, and then you'll decide. Now you're an advisor, make suggestion to me. Which was a good, so I learned that in the early days, which is good. Now I'd like to have a few questions. The role of INSGA in various points, the various issues that you raise. How can INSGA help? What do you see as the role of INSGA? Few things. Academic freedom. What's the role of INSGA there, if any? Maybe we'll start with Soledad.
Well, like I said, my region is very diverse, and there are currently countries where academic freedom is not existent. And to have support from international organizations that raise the issues and keep raising the issues after 5, 10, 50 years, it is really, really important that we don't forget there are countries that are still under very difficult conditions for their people. So the fact that our scientists that cannot practice and teach science in their own country, and they either had to flee or hide in their own country, I think is something that we need to be aware of. And INSGA can raise that voice and that concern in the international level.
Thank you. Christine.
Yeah, so again, from a pragmatic stance, I guess, I think academic freedom is obviously something extremely important. And so colleagues that decide that this or that or XYZ is an issue and that they want to drive into that, I completely respect that. And I think that it's necessary and it makes for good science. But I also think, because I had this discussion inside my institution when somebody questioned what I was doing, and I think that academic freedom is also the ability to choose when a city comes to you and says, this is my problem, can you help me? And when we say, yes, I can help you, I'll do my best to help you, I will try to mobilize data, methodologies to help you, is, I find, an expression of academic freedom also. Because it's a real problem, and that as an academic I choose to do that, I think that I should be left alone to be able to do that also. And I think so there's many ways of academic freedom, and I think this is one of them.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, so I had already mentioned, the importance of academic freedom in my brief introduction, because indeed it's coming under pressure even in regions of the world where we thought it's quite consolidated. And you ask now for the role of INSGA, and I think, of course, the role is well, maybe manifold. On the one hand, INSGA, I think, is great in itself as being a network for the exchange of good practices, but also maybe as a network making others aware of bad developments. At the same time, by the very policy advice that INSGA provides, or the skills for it, you can maybe also counteract developments that lead to the undermining of academic freedom. What do I mean? I think in many cases it's not necessarily a clear-cut evil plan of a government to undermine academic freedom. It can also be, what I meant before, subconsciously, in the sense of that funding is shifting in a way that in the end you feel you cannot do certain research anymore, not necessarily because you face legal prosecution, but simply because you don't find money, there is no institutional positions. So by advising accordingly policymakers in the areas of science policy, education policy, and in other areas, I think INSA has a contribution to make so that these developments, at least, we try to avoid them at an early stage.
Very good. Jane.
I think that academic freedom, as long as researchers are not engaging in polarizing kind of issues, they won't have any kind of challenge from decision makers. You see, if they are engaging in technical, very down-to-earth research that does not threaten decision makers, I think that they will have full academic freedom to continue their work. But once they are working in other type of I would say, research where it is a threat to decision makers, then this is where maybe INSGA could be coming in to bring together researchers who are working in some areas to show how this is supported by very clear evidence, and also work with people on the ground, with the citizen, because as long as we can show that citizens trust the science, trust the researchers, then somehow we protect their academic freedom. So that is my view on academic freedom and the role that INSGA can play.
So maybe add a little bit to that one, and Christine, you could certainly add to us. I'll add a little bit to that one. In many countries, including here in Canada, there will be significant, I could say more, probably huge, investment in defense. What will be the impact on academic freedom, and is there a role for INSGA there?
I was going to talk about crises, but maybe there's a segue between crises and defense. So to answer directly your question, I think that there's an opportunity when government says that their policy is to move towards defense, because that's where they'll put money. And I think, that being said, it's also an opportunity then to use that segue that the government is creating to create better pathways of science advice, because that's where they're willing to listen for now, and then probably in I don't know how many years it will be something else. So I think yes, it is difficult, because it's always this equilibrium between what the researchers, a group of researchers think that is important. I mean, even though we have a defense policy now, or a different defense policy now, it doesn't change climate change. Hey, it's still out there. Anybody noticed? But they might be willing less to answer. So I think what is always difficult is not being too much of an opportunistic way of doing things. But then, again, at the sake of repeating myself, I guess I'm a pragmatic. What I was going to say is that in crises also, it's a really special way of doing policy advice. We went through COVID. Or we're going through times that are difficult, and as soon as the adrenaline starts to hit a certain level, I think people become deaf to policy advice, because they're looking for quick answers. And there, as researchers, we're really bad at doing things quickly, because we want to do the study and it takes a lot of time, and these people need an answer very, very quickly. So in difficult times, I think science advice needs to step up also to be able to answer maybe with 80% of the answer, but have an answer, and not be too concerned about having 100% of all of the study done. So,
other comments from the other panelists on that? Yeah, Soledad.
Yes. I agree with what you said. Times of crisis are times of acting fast and with whatever we have. But I think also academy gives us the opportunity to slow down and bring up ethical issues and really think of the consequences of some decisions and how they're going to impact on a longer scale, a bigger scale, and bring up those issues to the decision makers who are just in a hurry to make decisions. Well, just remember this little thing up here. Ethics has to be in the conversation, and sometimes we need to bring those points up in the conversation and also talk to each other. We need to, in times of crisis, we need to build consensus in our societies. And to build consensus, we need to talk to each other in a more relaxed, with another context, without decisions to be made right away. And I think networks such as INSGA can provide that platform to talk to others, to learn from other experiences, and to just put some pause in some decisions to really try to make the best decision.
Marcus?
Yeah, so I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure whether I would agree saying that times of crisis are bad times for science advice. Of course, you can argue, when we are thinking about the COVID times, that, the slowness of academic procedures and so on was hampering, sometimes the impact. My impression, however, is, at least from a European perspective, maybe it was the time that science was listened to more than long time before, if only to defend unpopular decisions, for example, on lockdowns. So I would say it depends. So I think it's not a clear picture. But what is true is, of course, and that leads me maybe to Remy's question at the beginning, that in times of crisis, the policymakers might have this yes, but attitude, in the sense of, yes, we know we should do that, but given the particular situation, we can't. And in terms of defense, I wouldn't say this as such is a risk for academic freedom. But of course, it has effects in the sense of, if you have to spend more money in times of already constrained budgets on defense, because you see a shifting geopolitical landscape, there is less money for other investments that you would have to do. And we see a version of that right now in the European Union, discussions about the next 7 years budget. Commission has proposed essentially a doubling of the budget on research, but this has come not just that aspect of the budget, but under heavy fire, saying, no, in terms of crisis, focus has to be somewhere else. We all know this would be ideal, but we can't do it because, we don't have the means and so on. And of course, a second effect of having a strong focus on defense is, of course, simply that you talk less about other elements that are important. But so I would say, in that sense, yes, there is a certain risk, but maybe not directly.
Very good. Shane, do you want to add here a little bit?
You want to adhere a little
Again,
bit.
I would like to say that I agree with Soledad. She talked about ethics, and I think this is extremely important in today's world, that we highlight the ethical part of science advice, because as scientists, we have values, we have priorities that might differ from decision makers. And I think that this has to be really very clear right from the start. And advice in a vacuum. And I don't think that science or the advice that we give is neutral. What advice we give now can be used tomorrow to do something that would be against our values and that would have impact beyond our comprehension now. So what technology we are making today, for example, AI, could tomorrow be used in surveillance, and it is already being used. So we don't necessarily have the foresight for that. And what decision makers would talk about, like defense policies, it might be just attack policies for us. So we need to be conscious of this and think in the long term. Although we don't have all the evidence right now, we have to be careful and cautious in the type of advice we give as scientists, and think about values that we have.
Thank you very much. Maybe just add a couple of points here. What Marcus was saying when you talk with elected official and government, yeah, we know, but it's not the right time. We get that almost every week, I would say. So that's always a challenge there. So maybe providing advice or suggestion that may be more actionable, probably very important. But also in terms of crisis, and maybe here at this meeting for next year or some other year, what we learn and what we forgot about the pandemic, about the COVID pandemic. Because overall, during the pandemic, certainly my role in Quebec became more important. Because many groups were asking for some type of advice, although you don't have all the answer. And for INSGA, and Christian can talk about that, a lot of interest on science advice from different parts of the world, related to COVID, but also related to other things. Oh, now we understand that why we need this type of structure. Can you help us, for example, with climate change? So I think something, some kind of post-mortem after 5 years, 6 years, will be good. Lesson learned from the COVID pandemic, because we have the tendency, after the crisis is kind of not as acute, to go back into the old shoes and old ways of doing things. So that's I'm sure we can learn something there. Next series of a question for you, and it was mentioned mostly by Marie-Christine, science advice at different level, and the role of INSGA there. And you can start with the United Nations, this type of global organization, then you go to a country or a continent, then you go to a region, then you go to city. What's the role of INSGA there, and how do we need to adapt the type of workshop we organize, the training program that we may have, and so on? So we'd like to start. Maybe we'll start with Christine, Marie-Christine, because she's the one who mentioned a lot about cities.
Well, I think in any kind of multi-level action, the objective is to bring together the stakeholders, depending on the issue, because there are some issues that will remain sort of at a national level, and not then not all levels would be engaged. But I think that bringing together different levels is the recognition of the issue is the most important. And I think INSGA might be helpful there in identifying the issues and bringing together the different stakeholders at the table to agree on this issue and agree on how they can work together and use science advice, for lack of a better word, to resolve the issue. So there's many ways of doing things this way, and one of the things that I can suggest maybe is using collaborative governance approaches, which are very helpful in bringing together multi-level. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending on the level of government we are talking about, there are differences in the sense of the competencies that level has, the degree of professionalization of policy making at that level, in the sense of it's full-time politicians. Is it, when you're going down to municipal levels, you might face, other policy makers at the same level, in the sense of other institutionalized forms of science advice, which is usually at the national level or sub-national maximum and supranational level. At the same time, I think in the end, the role of INSGA is not fundamentally different in the sense of fostering exchange of good practices. I mentioned that before, but essentially also trying to teach communication skills. In the end, it's always, no matter at which level, about translating evidence, scientific know-how, into a language, that the policymaker understands, and that is also not perceived as this paternalistic approach. We tell you what to do, and you rather do it quick. So I think in that sense about capacity building, training, younger people, but also, others in science, how to communicate with policy stays the same, no matter at which level we are actually, operating.
Good point. Communication certainly very, very key. Often I say, like in Canada, French, English. It's not the divide often with high-level policymakers. It's more like French and, let's say, Mandarin. So it takes a while to understand each other. Soledad.
Yes, I think INSGA has been instrumental to highlight opportunities for science advice. Often we think of places such as municipalities as too concerned with day-to-day decisions, and many people don't see opportunities for science advice there. But when you get to know scientists in all different fields, you see so many opportunities for them to participate of these decisions, of this planning, of these policies, in educational, in schools, everywhere. Scientists can bring information that is valuable for decision makers. So I think the fact that INSGA has a move in North America towards this very specific niche is going to be very helpful to bring up all these opportunities in different places.
Thank you. Shane.
I think that one of the advantage of INSGA is that people do not see it as being close to any kind of governmental agency. So it's quite independent. So people are comfortable with INSGA. And as INSGA Africa, we work with the scientists. They are the expert in their countries. They are the expert in their field. So they bring us their research and we try to support them in strengthening their capacities. We are not there to tell them what kind of research to do, but how they could translate their research and how they can reach their government with our help and make a difference at policy level. So this is the type of work that INSGA is doing on the ground that I think is different and is very important. And we have different means to do that. We have different channels. And because the new generation of scientists, they are like the digital native scientists, they want to use different kind of platforms to make their research known to politicians, to make their advice available to citizens also. So this is the type of work that we support as INSGA Africa specifically, and we work across barriers, language barriers, across countries, and we have regional focus. We also work with senior members of the societies, the very young, and we try to address issues that are important in the different regions. So I would say that we try to work at different levels also, and reach out to people where they are.
Yeah, very good. Maybe I'll just add a few things here. For the European chapter, one of their key projects where they were established was what's the impact of culture and language on the effectiveness of delivering science advice. So if you're interested, you could go on our website and you'll see information, and you could contact the colleague in Europe. We also established 3 years ago, I think, a network in French speaking, Réseau International en Conseil Scientifique dans le monde francophone. So also there, also the way of often formulating the type of advice can be different depending of where you are in the world, and also the type of culture and language that you are following. Of course, today we don't have any group, anyone from Asia, but Asia also, the chapter in Southeast Asia is very, very active. And if you're interested, the next big meeting of INSGA 2027, this time, will be in Asia, will be in Malaysia. So all of you will be most welcome. So maybe the last question before we open up for question from you in the room. The public, often they are the one paying our salary in many parts of the world. How do we engage them? What type of interaction must we have interacting with the public, bring them on board or not? And what's the role of INSGA there? So this time, who would like to start? Not impose anyone.
I'd like to, so when I do trainings with academics, I like to say that public is different from decision makers. And the way to communicate with those audiences must be different. But publics are very, very important in bringing up issues that the policymakers are not seeing. So sometimes, and it actually, I've seen it happen in Chile with wetlands. Wetlands were not seen as a value asset in Chile until communities in one city in the south, Valdivia, saw it as part of their culture, of their city. In fact, 30% of the city is covered by wetlands. So instead of seeing that as a problem, they started to see wetlands as an asset, and they wanted to protect it. And they started to bring all these concerns to the representatives. After several years of working with academics, this became a law, a national law, to protect wetlands in Chile. So I think that is a very good example that if maybe some issues are not of interest of policymakers in that moment, which probably is not in the urgencies, they could be a very important issue for communities. And so we should, as academics, as scientists, we can also help them bring up and communicate better with decision makers, bringing up data, studies, everything we do. We can support communities to communicate with decision makers, and I think all the training that we do in INSGA can be very helpful in that manner.
So the role from INSGA would be the Latin American chapter could help in that interaction with the public?
Yes, because it's again bringing up the value of science for society in different opportunities, different ways with different actors. But that's what we need to highlight in Latin America. Science is not a luxury of rich countries. It's a need for any society.
Thank you. Marie-Christine.
Well, first of all, I think for cities, bringing in the public, bringing in the population is crucial. It's important. But I think there's ways of doing it. So maybe just tell you a little story of a city that we work with on the south shore of Montreal on flooding. And so we were working with the city, and they had mapped out where the flooding was and where there were issues of water accumulation. And it's a city that's been hit quite often, and the citizens are extremely tired of this recurrence, and they're very unhappy with the city. And so we decided to do a town hall, but we were afraid because we were afraid that it was going to become a negotiation process. So we set out to be in a position of, let's call it a translator, where we would explain what are the scientific issues. So we were working as a multidisciplinary team, but we were explaining to the citizens, okay, so here are the issues and why there is a recurrence, and what has been done and what's working, what's not working, on a sort of a very neutral basis. And the city sort of joined in to say, well, this is what we're trying to do. And a lot of the citizens were incredible in their remarks, where they were saying, oh, finally I understand. Finally, someone's hearing me. Finally, I can say, you know, what is bothering me about this. So, you know, in a nutshell, and to make this story short, is that we realized that being a translator between issues of the city, issues of science, and issues of citizens, we were a great area as a neutral ground. And I think that INSGA might develop some tools that are helpful to that, of this area of creating capacity of discussion and dialogue between all of the different issues of the stakeholders.
Thank you. Good point. Marcus.
Yeah, so actually, your question is a difficult one, not just in the sense of how you define public. Do we really mean by public like every single citizen? And I think if that's the claim, to reach all of them, then there's not much hope. At the same time, depending on the relationship of policy making and the public at which level, because here I indeed think the level is decisive in the sense of that maybe at the municipal level, the effects of policy making are much more immediately felt than maybe at the supranational level where decisions, you know, it takes time before they are felt at an individual level. Having said that, I still think maybe the role of INSGA is maybe twofold. On the one hand, is about communicating policies to the public, to making complex decisions understandable. I mean, this can be by very practical means in terms of translating policies into an infographic, something, a promotional material that helps understand very complex processes, but also communicating in a broader sense of the meaning, you know, what are we doing and why does a certain decision potentially make sense or not. On the other hand, it's about giving a voice to the public, in the sense of trying also to find out what are concerns of citizens, of the public, that can be transported to the policy level, no matter at which level in the sense of municipal, subnational, national, or supranational. I think that's the double role I would see for INSGA.
Thank you very much, Shane.
Thank you, Remy. So I think that at the level, in Mauritius, I would say that we've seen that decision makers have taken decision and made policy on the basis of some scientific evidence, but then they had to reverse their policy because of protests made by the public, also on the basis of scientific evidence. So you can have scientific evidence for a policy and then scientific evidence against the same policy. So it's really important that we work with the public. So this involves the indigenous communities, the NGOs, and the public is quite vast. But at INSGA Africa, one of the things that we have been doing is that we have been supporting some project where the researchers are working with the community. For instance, in one case, we had one where they were translating scientific jargon into language that would be easily accessible to people in their villages. So then these communities are able to participate in decision-making at the level of the village, and then which impact the decision-making process in that part, area of their country. So this is something that I think that INSGA could get involved in that focus on supporting more projects where the scientists are working with communities, with the public, and to involve them in decision-making. So strengthen the capacity of the public to understand the science, specifically for challenges that we are facing, like climate change, like health issues in their areas. So work on the ground and support the researchers that work on the ground. It's important that we help the public to understand the science behind decision-making also, so that they can be fully included in decision-making.
Yeah, good points. And maybe it's not exactly INSGA, but with the FRQ, with the Quebec Research Fund, we started a small project a few years ago. We call it Engagement, and it's really engaging the public. And they are the one making proposal to us, not scientists. So, and a lot of the proposals we receive are in the health sector. and environment. These are the two major topics. And of course, as I said for other things, the language of a scientist and the language of most people that we call general public, it's not the same. So they have to learn to understand each other. So we give time. It takes time to build these type of things. But in the end, the added value is amazing. And these persons understand a bit better also the scientific method, scientific approach, that you come back and forth sometimes. You have to change your hypothesis. I think working with the public takes time, challenging, but very, very rewarding also when it works. So now a question from you, from the public, and maybe introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Good morning. Thanks for this. This is so interesting. We've been interested, our team has been interested for a few years in better understanding what happens at the interface between science and policy. And we're interested in the interface between science and everything. And we conducted a study. We did an inventory, a digital inventory of what's being done in Canada at the interface between research in universities and policy at all levels of government. So we analyzed this data, we had a thing. We also conducted a literature review, a scoping review of the literature to better understand what are the practices. And I have a question for you. So what we learned is that when it comes to the interface between science and policy, and of course advice is part of this, there are really three big ways for science to reach policymakers. And here, I mean, of course, it's a very, very diverse space, right? That interface, and there's all sorts of things that are happening, and there's all sorts of people who are involved. But, you know, researchers can actually collaborate with governments to produce the research that they need to generate the evidence that they need. So that's one thing. And then, of course, they can also do the communication piece that Marcus is talking about, which has to do with disseminating these results in a language that's going to actually meet the users where they need. But a lot of what's happening in the interface revolves around collaborative co-creation, deliberative practices. And I think this is something that Marie-Christine is very familiar with Ideas Lab and things like that. So I'm just wondering, so looks like we want to move with INSGA beyond the advice and sort of embracing the wider scope, because the communication piece, as we know, is not the most effective way to engage with policymakers. Maybe when you're working directly with the decision makers, then, you know, they need to have their 2 minutes brief to understand the issue. But those who are actually making the policy, they need much deeper engagement, and they need to be talking to the interest holders much beyond the scientists. So I wonder if you have something to say about sort of, I mean, Rémi, you were asking, should we change the name, Science Advice? And basically my question is the same. So what does science advice look like when we really embrace the deliberative, co-creative, and what does INSGA look like in that
Thank you very much. Who would like to, Marcus, to start with?
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment and question, because I think indeed you're going to the very heart, you know, of the problem. Of the problem of science advice, because indeed I think we need a broader understanding of what it means and also the aspects it entails. And I mean, I think there are some established instruments that we know. I mean, some is, for example, pairing schemes that, you know, also the decision makers, policy makers really get to know the work of scientists also by simply, you know, shadowing them for a certain period of times, and the scientists learn maybe to better understand, you know, the work of a policymaker. I would maybe quote a very concrete example, what we have been rolling out over the last few years in the European Parliament, because we realized as well that traditional forms of science advice is not working, or at least not working as well as it should. Because if it's advice that comes before, you know, without the request from the political side, it's usually rather under the category of lobbyism. Not necessarily in a negative sense, but one among other opinions that, you know, you can or cannot consider. If it's requested explicitly, usually it comes too late in the process, because when you start, you know, generating something, at the moment they want to discuss it, you are usually too late. So what we have come up with, maybe a suggestion also to replace science advice, is accompanying expertise. And the idea simply being, rather than providing a product of advice at a certain moment in time, it's about providing a team of scientists, experts that accompany, for example, a legislative file from the very beginning to the very end of the process. So meaning you address the issue of trust because these experts become part of the team of the policymakers. And at the same time, they are able to respond quickly also to urgent needs in the conceptualization of a bill, when you try to make compromises, which is important in the EU context between political groups, but also later when negotiating with the member states, for example. And this has been fairly successful. I'm not sure that it resolves all the issues, but at least, it gives a more direct link between scientists and also more of an ownership on the side of the scientists, because you're not just part of a big positioning paper where you are featuring as one among many authors. You really feel, I'm part of the process. It just doesn't mean that everything you will suggest will be followed, but you are part of the process.
I think time is running out, and there's still a lot of questions, so I go to the next question on the side. Introduce yourself, please, Robert.
Hi, Remy. So, Reinhard Reitmeier, University of Toronto. So I want to make a point about, taking off from Soledad's comment, that words matter. I was just thinking of the example of wetlands versus the word swamp. So if you have a wetland, you want to preserve it, you want a swamp, you want to drain it. So the words actually do matter very carefully in communication. So let's talk about advice as a word. That word has different meanings. So I would say Canada can lead in this because we have a Council of Canadian Academies, as Remy knows. They do not provide advice. They do not provide recommendations. They're an expert panel that provides findings. And what decision makers, the public do with the findings, that's up to them. So I think that's an approach. Canada can lead in that way. We've done this for many years. We have, the state of science, technology, innovation in Canada in 2025 using international comparators where we do have, Soledad, some data, not all the data we need, of course, but again, these are the findings. You can read the report, it's online, and you can then digest the findings and maybe inform policymakers about so I like the word inform, maybe is a good one, policymakers and the public about what those findings are, and then move forward for that. So thank you. So I don't really have a question, but I think it's just, the point is that, language, words really do matter. And again, when you're talking to decision makers, that might have a meaning. Talk to scientists, that might have a meaning. When you talk to the public writ large, that has maybe a different meaning. Thank you. Great panel.
Yep, thank you very much. Good point, and it's just off the press, so anyone interested to look at the report, it's well done. And then again, the words matter, and the translation is not necessarily easy, because automatic translation make mistake, and words mean very different thing in different language. So we have to be careful there as well. Next question.
So NCR, Fanny from Perimeter Institute. You mentioned about academic freedom, and thank you so much for bringing it in the discussion. The point is that, there is no academic freedom, even the freedom of expression in non-democratic countries. But the point is that if the scholars, they really face danger and they leave their countries, coming to the democratic countries, especially coming from conflict regions, they also face violation of academic freedom when they also leave, because there are also barriers for them regarding visa or even being participating in some specific topics because of the security issues. Even in Canada, there are 130 institutes in the list that the Canadian scientists are banned having the collaboration with them because they are not receiving the federal budget for that. So I'm just wondering that these scientists and scholars, they really face such kind of the situation. So who is going to protect their academic freedom, even if they forced to leave their countries and they are really looking for environment to work safely? Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to answer, give comments on that. Shaheen, did you understand the question? Or?
I did, and I also want to thank NCA for her question. And I really commensurate with her because I think this is an important issue. In Africa, I think that the visa issue is a huge issue. So if we as scientists cannot how do I say, voyager, then without a visa, then our research also
we can't travel.
be translated, cannot be communicated through these kind of travels. And in some cases, as we've heard, this is even more damaging for the scientists because they face issues in their own countries where they don't have the academic freedom, and then they have no place to be. So I think this is where organizations such as INSGA, which has some kind of a political weight, can make a really big impact and influence government to consider scientists who are persecuted, scientists who want to have a place to be part of the science decisions, advice ecosystem. So whether it's at the UN level, whether it's at ISC level, I think because when we have some kind of power, we need to use that to support those who are in our network. I think this is one of the first steps that we can take as organization. And it might not make a difference now, but it will make a difference in the future.
Thank you very much, Shaheen. And she had trouble to get her visa, so that's one of the reasons why she's not here. And getting visa to come to Canada, not always easy. So 2 more questions, short answer.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pune Magul and I'm a professor at Polytechnic Montreal. I want to know your opinion on the role of ESG, environment, society, and governance in decision making. You talked about the importance of words and knowledge mobilization, capacity building, and these things. And I'm asking this question because when you tried to compare the connection, explain the connection between policy, scientists, and the public. I got this feeling that scientists and stakeholders, scientists and policymakers, they are in the room, they work together. Sometimes there is no agreement, consensus between them. And we have the public. And the public is treated like a child. They have to learn. We have to advise them. We have to give them input. And they can complain or they can be happy. And when we talk about this capacity building, community-based initiative in a municipality, personally, I feel that science and technology is less important. It's mostly group work in a community. But when we have quantum technology, when we have AI, when we have such, trends, how we can involve the public in decision making and capacity building and community-based technology adoption.
Thank you. Would you like to take that, Marie-Christine? Or?
Yeah, I guess it's more of an editorial comment that I'm going to make than a positioning on this. I think that 2 things. First of all, I think that the public is overwhelmed with information just on the social media feeds and et cetera, et cetera. And because of that, it's not always easy to engage with the public. And we've seen it. We have a lot of work that we do with the public. And without going into a long story, it was easier to do this in the Global South, to work with the teams, the research teams, and the public for many different reasons than it was for us to do the same research that we had in the 3 cities in North America and in Europe. Because people in the global north did not feel concerned and that they were overburdened by questions. So it's a very difficult equilibrium. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that you were talking about SDGs. I think it's something that comes in as a policy of the UN. I think it's been adopted by institutions. I'm not sure how well it's trickled down to the public. And we can use it as a model, we can use it as a base for discussion, but I think that, it's just a question of not it trickling down to the public.
Thank you very much. Last question, short question.
Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Tony Labillois. I have worked for more than 35 years in our National Statistics Agency, Statistics Canada. I'm surprised not to hear more about data and evidence-based information, and how do we help policymakers distinguish what is true from what is not true when they tend to take all kinds of data sources and make them their truths. So I'm interested to hear more about how, yes, words matter, but how do we make sure that without preaching or without trying to give advice that would not be well received, how do we make sure that we highlight the data sources that are really meaningful and that we make them distinguish the importance of that? Thank you.
Yeah, very good point. It's true, we did not focus on that too much, and especially now that even data from the type of organization like yours, some people, some decision makers basically say, I don't believe them. So that's very challenging. So Marcus, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe just, obviously that's also a very relevant question, and I would also say, I mean, my personal experience is that, you know, when policymakers ask for expertise, often they understand quantitative evidence and statistics and so on. So it's often more about, you know, again, communicating, but also making clear that, you know, statistics, you know, there's also some bias, ambiguity, and so on. So I think in the end, whether you communicate quantitative or qualitative evidence, in the end, still requires communication skills. We did also a research project which was called Science, Numbers, and Politics, you know, trying also to have a closer look at the role numbers particularly play in communicating science to policymakers. And again, the assessment is a bit mixed in the sense of, on the one hand, it does a lot good, but at the same time, there is also this tendency to focus exclusively on numbers that get, you know, a bit of like a benchmark out of the blue, and then almost like a fetish, you know, that you want to follow a certain number. I'm just saying, I think there is still more work to be done in order to increase awareness, you know, also about how statistics work, how numbers work, and so on. So I will stop here for the sake of time.
Yeah, very good point. And of course, certainly, like if I think of my government in Quebec, especially the Treasury Board, they like numbers like that, and but it's dangerous sometimes. 20 seconds. Last comment from the panel. We'll start with you, Soledad.
Well, I think despite differences, there's a lot we can share and learn from each other. So I will hope that many of you would like to join INSGA and keep the conversation going and share with us what you have learned and what we can bring to other contexts and other countries.
Thank you. Marie-Christine.
Yeah, thank you. So I need your help. Anybody who wants to help in building INSGA North America on city science pathways, let's call it. So I think that for me, it's the building of an infrastructure that's important. I think we can, as INSGA North America, we can have the capacity to bring together the different stakeholders around city issues. And my objective is to make it as an area where things can be discussed and that tools can be taken and used to help this discussion.
Thank you. Marcus.
Thank you. So I guess my take-home message would be threefold. First, I think we need to get science advice, evidence closer to policymakers. Institutions establishing structures is a first step, but as such, it doesn't yet provide the silver bullet. Secondly, and this is linked with the first point, I think we have to keep the element of trust in mind, which is in a double sense of the meaning. Trust in the evidence that we provide, but also trust as an element in the relationship between advisors, scientists, and policymakers. And you have to be good at both levels if you want to be successful. Last but not least, and that's what I have to say as a historian and political scientist, I think STEM is not enough. We need an A, arts, so we need STEAM to be able to steam up for science advice.
Good. Shaheen.
There's a book that I like, which is called The Responsibility of Intellectuals by Noam Chomsky. And I think that we have also a responsibility as researchers and scientists. And we have a responsibility in the science advice that we provide. I think this is what we can control. So we should do evidence-based science advice. And as INSGA, this is what we should be supporting researchers to provide evidence-based science advice, but also supporting researchers to provide the best options to the policymakers. And we also need to be more involved in capacity strengthening for civil servants in the government. I think this is something that we will need to be looking into in the near future.
Well, thank you very much. My 2 words, after so many years as chief scientist in Quebec, you mentioned that, Marcus, trust, key, and resilience, because the power at B changes all the time. So we have to be very resilient. So we have a session now also in the Alberta room, and tomorrow morning, another session sponsored by the Quebec Research Fund on science diplomacy. So hopefully we'll see many of you there. Thank you very much, and thank to the panelists.